Hey everyone, Tankenstein here. In this video, I'll be reviewing the Vijayanta, of which is a currently Tier 5 8.0 BR medium tank in the British Ground Forces tech tree. This vehicle currently costs 8,560 Golden Eagles. With that said, in this video, I'll be going over everything that you need to know about this tank, including its stats, how it plays, I'll go over its strengths and weaknesses, I'll give you some scores in several key areas, and then I'll give my final recommendation and if I feel this vehicle is worth purchasing or not. With that said, if you like this kind of video, please consider subscribing, but without further ado, let's get into it. Now as always, I'll place its stat card here on the side of the screen. Important things to note are its armor thickness, or lack thereof, its reload speed, and its armor pen. Now with that said, for how it plays. In short, the Vijayanta is like a mix of the Vickers Mark 1 and Mark 3, although without the fun bits of the Mark 3, like its better armor, at least when it comes to its turret and how the armor is laid out, the speed, and a laser rangefinder, despite being the same 8.0 BR as the Mark III. In other words, the Vijayanta is unfortunately a bit boring. It has minimal armor with only 80mm at max in the front for both the turret and the hull, while also having a mediocre power to weight ratio of only 16 horsepower per ton, though it makes the most of it and is surprisingly quite mobile. Plus, the Vijayanta also receives the new shells of the Vickers Mark III without losing the superior reload rate of the Mark I, which is around 20% faster than the Mark III. The problem with this is that this means that the Vijayanta gets a fairly decent M456 Heat FS shell, though replaces a good L28A1 APDS that has up to 350mm of armor pen from the Vickers Mark I with the M728 APDS, which only has up to 265mm of armor pen at max, resulting in around 85mm loss in armor pen with the APDS shell. This basically forces you to use the M456 Heat FS, which, while it is good, it will be bad against ERA, composites, and will explode when hitting any obstacles in the way of the enemy. Basically, with the Vijayanta, you're trading your good APDS from the Vickers Mark I for a good Heat FS from the Vickers Mark III, and that's essentially the main difference. As stated before, the only benefit that the Vijayanta has over the Vickers Mark III is a superior reload, despite sitting currently at the same BR, whereas again, the Mark III boasts a laser rangefinder, better turret, which means that there is slightly better armor layout, and a noticeably better power to weight ratio of 18.6 horsepower per ton. Regardless, being that the Vijayanta has good mobility, low armor, and a stabilizer, it actually works quite well as a flanker and base capper, as you will be able to fire on the move against enemies with at least some level of accuracy, which isn't guaranteed at this BR. It would be helped if it had a laser rangefinder, but of course, this does not. At least not as of right now. Otherwise, this tank should avoid brawling, as most enemy medium and heavy tanks will easily outclass the armor and even the firepower on the Vijayanta, turning it into mincemeat. But because of these deficiencies, the Vijayanta is essentially relegated to the aforementioned roles, as well as an occasional sniper, though the gunner's optics with between 4.9 and 6 times zoom is not really good, and you again have a lesser APDS shell, which could be easier for some people to fire at medium to long ranges due to its higher muzzle velocity compared to the Heat FS, though of course the Heat FS will be better at range due to how it pens the enemy. Basically, I'm just saying that you don't have too much of a choice in the matter due to the mediocre M728 APDS of the Vijayanta and a lack of a laser rangefinder. In short, keep this tank away from enemies and hope they never see you. With that said, let's get into its strengths and weaknesses. First, for its strengths. It features 2 LMGs and 1 HMG, of which will help to destroy lightly armored vehicles and aircraft, although the belts on the HMG only go through around 7mm of armor at max. Second, this features a good 105mm cannon with a stabilizer and a very good reload rate. Third, despite having a mediocre 16 horsepower per ton power to weight ratio, this is actually a fairly quick vehicle. For its fourth strength, it has 12 smoke grenades. For its fifth strength, it features night vision. Beyond this, it sits at 8.0 BR, which gets down tiered a good amount. Well, at least it currently sits at 8.0 BR. Now, not that it matters, but the Vijayanta also has longer side skirts, which are good for those that like to dress modestly in order to not show too much leg. And finally, it features premium RP and SL bonuses. Now with that said, for its weaknesses, the M728 APDS on the Vijayanta is firmly inferior to the L28A1 APDS on the Vickers Mark I. The M728 APDS is below mediocre and will almost always force you to use Heat FS. Second, it has mediocre armor thickness and tons of flat angles, making this a very easy vehicle to destroy. For its third weakness, while not a given at this BR, the Vickers Mark III, of which is also currently 8.0 BR, has a laser rangefinder, whereas again the Vijayanta currently does not. For its fourth weakness, its best shell, the M456 Heat FS, has spotty damage as it doesn't have a great post-pen damage pattern. Further, the Heat FS shell will explode if hitting any debris or obstacles along the way onto the enemy, which will be difficult to use in cities and forests. And finally, while not tall, the Vijayanta is fairly long, making it easier to hit than most other vehicles in its class. Now with that being said, let's get into how I score this vehicle. First, for armament, I give it a 6.25 out of 10. I'm probably being a touch generous with this score, but the Vijayanta is at least decent in respect to its armament. Between its good reload, pretty good Heat FS, and stabilizer, the Vijayanta can be a threat to nearly any tank that it will face. On the other hand, it has poor APDS, which will hamper it in some situations, and also lacks the aforementioned laser rangefinder of the currently same VR Vickers Mark III. Additionally, Heat FS isn't always that great, which is why I'm probably being a touch generous with the 6.25 out of 10 rating, but we'll just go with that. Now for mobility, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Despite its mediocre power to weight ratio, the Vijayanta is actually fairly quick. While it isn't as quick as the Vickers Mark III, AMX-30, and some other similar BR vehicles, the Vijayanta can still hold its own and outpace a majority of tanks around its BR, even if just slightly. For survivability, I give it a 4 out of 10. While it isn't the absolute worst by any means, the overall armor and thus the survivability of the Vijayanta is mediocre. With the exception of parts of the turret mantlet that can reach just above 200mm of armor thickness, the overall armor thickness on this vehicle is poor, with almost every shell from every tank that it will face being able to pen it with ease, including down to autocannons. Now overall, I'll give it a 5.5 out of 10. While a 5.5 out of 10 is still decent based on how I score vehicles, the Vijayanta isn't quite up to snuff with other similar BR premium vehicles, such as the T55 AM1, Term 3, or even the WMA 301. If the Vijayanta were a lower BR, such as 7.7, I could see this being a good 6 out of 10 overall, but it still wouldn't be amazing by any means. Don't get me wrong, even at 8.0 BR, the Vijayanta can still get the job done, but it doesn't do anything particularly well compared to other vehicles at this BR, which is why it gets its okay rating of 5.5 out of 10. Now with all that said, for my final recommendation, this vehicle is essentially entirely inferior to the currently same VR Vickers Mark III, as it has lesser armor at least insofar as the layout of the turret, speed, and no laser rangefinder, though at least making up for it in part with a 20% faster reload rate and a slightly faster turret traverse rate. Because of this, it is essentially a Vickers Mark I with a good, though not amazing, Heat FS and a mediocre APDS, while maintaining no other notable upgrades other than the top-mounted LMG. For these reasons, I will say to avoid the Vijayanta unless it sees a BR decrease to 7.7 BR, or unless it goes on sale, preferably both. I'm not saying that this is not a capable vehicle at 8.0 BR, but it certainly isn't anything special, playing essentially like the already dull Mark I, but with a somewhat better, though still troublesome, Heat FS shell. Personally, I would rather take many other currently 8.0 BR tanks to battle in place of the Vijayanta, including but not limited to the T55A, M48A2 GA2, Vickers Mark III, Term 3, M60A1 AOS, Type 69, T95E1, and the Type 74C, of which also has a stabilizer, as well as a laser rangefinder and the same M456 Heat FS shell as the Vijayanta, with the Type 74C also being somewhat faster and having more armor. Again, I'm not saying that the Vijayanta is a bad vehicle, but it is a bit boring and is arguably of the same or even of lesser quality compared to many of its other currently 8.0 BR contemporaries. If it drops to 7.7 BR, it will be a bit better and will likely end up doing a little bit better in its matches, but it'll still be boring. Hell, for just a few hundred GE more, you could purchase the much better and substantially more fun VBCI2 MCT30 in the French Grand Tech Tree, of which is rank 6 instead of the Vijayanta's rank of 5, meaning that it can grind through a larger portion of the tech tree than the Vijayanta, but of course the VBCI2 is French, whereas the Vijayanta is in the British Crown Tech Tree. Now again, I don't think that the Vijayanta is a waste of GE, but if you're looking to purchase it, I would again suggest to do so when it's on sale, or if you have a substantial coupon for it. Even if it drops to 7.7 BR, I don't know if I can recommend the Vijayanta, simply because it's too generic and average to be worth its full purchase price in a sea of interesting and good premium vehicles, such as the Term 3 Object 120, or even the much better and rank 6 Khalid, which currently only costs 350 Golden Eagles more than the Vijayanta, and is substantially better than it, even at its own BR. Plus, the Khalid has a higher rank, meaning that it can research through rank 7 of the British Ground Forces tech tree without RP penalty, which is huge. By the way, if you want a review on the Khalid or the aforementioned VBCI2 MCT30, I'll try to link those both below. Regardless, I'm not saying to not purchase the Vijayanta, but there are better purchases than it, even in the British Ground Forces tech tree. Again, including the aforementioned Khalid, as well as the Ruacat 105, Challenger DS, as well as arguably the Centurion Mark V AVRE. Take it as you will, but the Vijayanta is just too boring and too average in essentially every way for me to recommend it, outside of a sale and a BR decrease. It's just a shame that this is, to my knowledge, the first tank flying under the Indian flag in War Thunder. Gaijin could have done so much better with its release, and it's really a shame and kind of feels like a letdown. But that being said, thanks so much for watching, everyone. Please, if you'd like, consider subscribing, liking, commenting. It all means the world to me, but either way, thanks again, and I'll see you all on the other side. Take care, everyone.